Hi dear friends, some words of Torah for Parshat Shemot. This parsha reads like a screenplay. The setting up of the plot and rising action appear first, telling the macro national story of the Jews who were enslaved harshly and their children murdered. The camera then pans to the individual story of how Moshe was born and saved from his own infanticide by being placed in the Nile and found by Paro's daughter. The next several verses show the life of Moshe, how he grew up in Paro's palace, how he saw his brethren's plight and was a seeker of justice, and how he had to flee Egypt as a result of killing an oppressive Egyptian who was whipping a Jewish slave. He made his way to Midian, met Yisro's daughters, heroically saved them from some nasty local shepherds, and then ended up marrying the eldest daughter, Tzipporah. They later had a son, Gershom. Before continuing with the life of Moshe, we are presented at this point with a 3-verse interlude. The camera pans back to the macro national story, the harsh labor of the Jewish slaves. And the Torah starts off this interlude by saying, Vayehi vayamim harabim hahem. It was during those long days that the king of Egypt died. Bnei Yisrael vayeanchu, they sighed from the labor and cried out. Their screams ascended to God due to their harsh labor. Elohim heard their wailing. He remembered the covenant he had made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Vayar Elohim et bnei Israel, God saw the Jewish people. Vayeda Elohim, and God knew. Then, right after that, the story goes back to Moshe, detailing his encounter with the burning bush, where Hashem reveals to him the plan to redeem the Jews and how Moshe should act as the redeemer. At face value, it would seem that the reason for the interlude before commencing with the life of Moshe is to indicate why, after having lived for many years in Midian, he was summoned specifically now to be the Redeemer. There first needed to be a trigger in Egypt to spur God to redeem the Jews, which was the increased cries of Bnei Israel upon Paro's death. At that moment, Hashem appeared to Moshe at the burning bush. What's curious is how the Torah expresses that trigger. It introduces this interlude with the words, Vayahi bayamim harabim hahem. It was during those long days. What does the word long mean in this context? The Midrash states that the days for the Jews felt long, because when you're suffering, time moves much more slowly, and every day feels like an eternity. This is in contrast to when Yaakov was working for Lavan in order to marry Rachel. There the Torah states, Vayihiyu be'einav ki yamim achadim. The days seemed very few for him, because when you're in love, the time passes by more quickly. We suggest that the emphasis on long days is employed to contrast Bnei Israel's experience with Moshe's. The Torah is presenting us this contrast between the painful plight of Bnei Israel versus the bucolic and pleasant life of Moshe living in Midian. There was no communication that we know of between Moshe and Egypt. Moshe was, in all likelihood, completely oblivious to what was going on with his brethren in Egypt. He wasn't aware that their plight had intensified through Paro's death or that their cries had ascended to heaven. His life was blissfully ignorant. He had a family, he was working for his father-in-law, and life was great. For Moshe, the days were not long, but were rather like the days of Yaakov working in exchange for Rachel. This is precisely why when Hashem appeared to Moshe, he stated twice that I have heard the cries of Bnei Israel. Once in chapter 2, verse 7, where God says, Ve'et sa'akatam shamati, and secondly in verse 9, Ve'ata hine tza'akat Bnei Israel ba'a elai. Now the cry of Israel has come to me. The first was that God acknowledged that he knew what Moshe already knew, that the Jews were suffering from slavery. But the second verse states what Moshe did not know, that their suffering had now intensified after Paro's death. This is how I feel we Jews in the diaspora should be feeling. Our lives are continuing, the days are short in the relative security and peacefulness of wherever we find ourselves. But at the same time, this past week, dramatic things have intensified. We lost 9 soldiers, each one an entire world. We've now been informed of the suffering of our brethren, and we've now received the news of the impending release, at least of some of the hostages, both alive and dead. This is our Moshe at the burning bush moment of where, despite shepherding our flock peacefully, we have a duty to take action because something has intensified within our people in Israel. Rav Mordechai Cohen, known as the Shach from the 17th century, provides a fascinating drush, an exposition. Hashem's name Elokim is mentioned 4 times in the context of 4 different verbs during those 3 interlude verses. It first says Vayishma Elokim, God heard. Vayizkor Elokim, it says second, Hashem remembered. Third, it says Vayar Elokim, Hashem saw. And fourth, Vayeda Elokim, Hashem knew. The Shach observes that the gematria of the word Elohim is 86, the exact same gematria for the word kos, which means cup. These 4 verbs allude to the 4 cups of wine that we drink at the Seder. First is Elokim heard, and that corresponds to the first cup, since we all have to hear the Kiddush when it is being recited on the first cup. The second verb, Elokim remembered, and that corresponds to the second cup, which is the cup we use when remembering the Exodus through recital of the Haggadah. Third, Elokim saw. That corresponds to the third cup, the one we use for Birkat HaMazon, for benching, since the Shulchan Aruch rules that when a person benches, he's supposed to look at the cup of wine while saying the grace after meals. And finally, number 4, Hashem knew, Vayeda Elokim. That corresponds to the Hallel that we recite over the 4th cup. This is because only one who truly knows and understands the miracles that Hashem has done for us can be so inspired to recite verses of praise to God as Hallel. Using this beautiful idea, I would like to suggest that we all, too, have a duty to exercise these 4 verbs in seeing the future unfold for our people in Israel over the next few days and weeks. Number 1, let us listen carefully to the words of the people of Israel, both the political leaders and those who have endured this suffering for so long. The way they express themselves is so important, especially since there is so much nuance to what is currently unfolding. Furthermore, listening is in contrast to speaking. As all the different opinions come out of Israel, let's listen to and sympathize with them all, both those who are for a peace deal and those who are against. We are certainly not qualified to weigh in from our distant perches out here in Midian. Number 2, let us remember always what Amalek has done to us and what we experienced as by way of miracles since October 7th. We must never forget this period, even long after the war is over and the very last hostage has been released. That's Vayizkor Elokim. 3, let us see, Vayar Elokim, what is happening in Israel. We all long with great anticipation for that moment when the hostages are released and we will all cry tears of happiness when, for example, we can open our screens and actually see the Bibas children returning safely home. And finally, number 4, Vayeda, let us know in the very core of our being what these last 18 months have done to our people. Let us praise Hashem with Hallel once this is over, and let us internalize how the hand of God has been orchestrating these events for the benefit of the Jewish people and indeed the entire world. Let's try to view the next few days and weeks as a redemption period for our people. We may not see the process unfold right away, but we can at least anticipate great things happening in our future. Even as we sit afar from Midian, let's look out for the burning bush when it beckons us to take action. May we all be a part of the redemptive process. May it unfold quickly and speedily, dear friends. Bimhei Rabbi Amenu Amen. Here's wishing you a beautiful Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.